I was sold like cattle, but the cowboy who bought me didn't know who I really was. 1878 Arizona Territory, 1878. The desert wind carried dust through the small frontier town of Red Mesa, coating everything in a thin layer of grit: the wooden storefronts, the tired horses tied to hitching posts, and the people who gathered in the square that morning. I stood among them, though not as one of them. My wrists were bound with rough rope, the fibers cutting into my skin each time I shifted my weight. The sun hung mercilessly overhead, and the heat pressed down like judgment. A raised wooden platform stood at the center of town. Men laughed and spat tobacco into the dirt while the auctioneer wiped sweat from his brow and shouted prices into the restless crowd. Livestock auctions were common in Red Mesa, but today the animals were gone. In their place stood women captured from raids along the border, lined up and inspected as if we were nothing more than tools to be purchased. I kept my chin lifted despite the humiliation. Around me, some women cried quietly, their shoulders trembling. Others stared blankly ahead, already defeated. I refused both. Fear could betray a person faster than chains ever could, and I had learned long ago that survival depended on control even when everything else was taken away. The auctioneer grabbed the arm of the woman beside me and spun her toward the crowd. "Strong worker. Good condition," he announced, laughter rippling through the men below. Coins clinked, bids rose, and within moments she was dragged away by her new owner. Her sobs faded into the noise of the town. Then it was my turn. A rough hand seized my chin, forcing my face upward. I resisted instinctively, earning a sharp slap that rang in my ears. The crowd chuckled. "This one's got spirit," the auctioneer said with amusement. "Healthy, stubborn, might need taming. Starting bid at $20. The words burned worse than the slap. $20. That was the price placed on my existence. 25, someone shouted. 30. The bids climbed while strangers judged me with cold, calculating eyes. I focused on breathing slowly, hiding the storm inside me. None of them could know who I really was. None of them could guess why men across Arizona were searching for me. 50, another voice called. The auctioneer grinned, clearly pleased. Fine price. Do I hear 60? A brief silence followed, broken only by the creaking of a sign swinging in the wind. Then a deep, calm voice spoke from the edge of the crowd. 70. The square quieted instantly. Heads turned toward the saloon porch where a tall cowboy stood, half-shadowed beneath the brim of a weathered hat. Dust coated his coat and boots, and a revolver rested easily at his hip as though it belonged there more than anything else in the world. He didn't smile or boast like the others. He simply watched, steady, unreadable. Whispers spread through the crowd. I caught a name passing between them. Caleb Boon. The auctioneer hesitated only a moment before slamming the gavel down. Sold. Just like that, my future changed hands. The rope around my wrists was cut, and for the first time that day, no one grabbed me roughly. Caleb Boon untied the knots himself, his movements careful, almost respectful. He stepped back once the rope fell away, giving me space instead of claiming it. You got a name? He asked quietly. For a moment, I considered telling the truth. But truth was dangerous. Anna, I said. He studied me briefly, as if weighing the lie but choosing not to challenge it. Well, Anna, he replied, tipping his hat slightly, you're safe now. Safe. The word felt strange, almost unreal. Because the man standing before me believed he had bought a frightened captive. He didn't know he had just purchased a secret worth killing for, or that the woman he saved was far more dangerous than anyone in Red Mesa could imagine. The ride to Caleb Boon's ranch lasted nearly half a day, though it felt longer beneath the relentless Arizona sun. Dust rose beneath the horses' hooves as we traveled away from Red Mesa, leaving behind the noise of the town and the echoes of the auction that still rang in my ears. Caleb rode slightly ahead, never tying my hands again, never watching me like I might run. That alone unsettled me. Any other man would have treated me as property won at a bargain. Caleb Boon treated me like a stranger he simply happened to be traveling with. Neither of us spoke much. The desert stretched endlessly around us, dry hills, scattered cactus, and distant mountains painted blue by heat and distance. I studied him carefully when he wasn't looking. His posture was relaxed but alert, the kind of awareness that came from years of danger. A rifle rested across his saddle, worn but well cared for. This was not a careless rancher. This was a man who survived by understanding threats before they appeared. As evening approached, the ranch came into view: a modest wooden house, a barn leaning slightly with age, and a wide stretch of fenced land dotted with grazing cattle. It wasn't impressive, but it felt steady, honest. A place built through effort rather than greed. Caleb dismounted first and handed me the reins. "You can stable her," he said simply, nodding toward the horse, as if testing whether I knew how. I led the animal calmly, loosening the saddle with practiced ease. When I turned back, he was watching me with narrowed eyes. "Not many captives know horses that well," he said. I shrugged lightly. "Learn fast." He accepted the answer, though doubt lingered in his expression. Life at the ranch settled into a quiet routine. I cooked meals, cleaned the small house, and helped repair fences damaged by windstorms. Caleb never ordered me harshly. Instead, he asked, which confused me more than cruelty would have. Each day I waited for the moment his kindness would change, for the ownership beneath it to reveal itself, but it never came. At night, I stayed awake longer than necessary, staring out the window toward the open desert. Somewhere beyond those hills were men searching for me. Men who would not stop until they found what I carried. My real name was Elena Cruz, and silence was the only thing keeping me alive. Days passed before Caleb spoke again about my past. We were repairing a fence line when my horse suddenly spooked at a rattlesnake hidden beneath a rock. I reacted instantly, pulling the rope tight and calming the animal with firm commands. The movements came naturally, drilled into me through years of training. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You ride like someone taught you proper." "Maybe someone did," I replied carefully. He gave a small, thoughtful nod but didn't press further. That evening, while the sky burned orange with sunset, he placed a revolver on the table between us while cleaning it. My eyes flicked toward it automatically before I could stop myself. "You familiar with one of these?" he asked casually. "Everyone out here is," I said. He smiled faintly. "Not like that." I said nothing. The quiet between us grew heavier, filled with questions neither of us voiced. For the first time since my capture, I felt something dangerous creeping into my thoughts: trust. It frightened me more than the auction ever had. The peace ended 3 nights later. The sound of distant horses shattered the silence. Hooves thundered across the desert, moving fast toward the ranch. Caleb was on his feet instantly, grabbing his rifle. "Inside," he ordered. But as lantern light flickered against the windows, instinct overcame caution. I moved toward the wall, picked up the revolver he had cleaned earlier, and checked its chamber without thinking. Gunfire exploded outside. Bullets struck the barn, splintering wood. Shadows moved across the yard, riders circling like wolves. I stepped to the window and fired. One shot. Precise. A rider fell from his horse. The yard went silent for a brief, stunned moment. Behind me, Caleb lowered his rifle slowly. His eyes were no longer calm or curious, they were certain. "You ever gonna tell me," he said quietly, "who you really are?" For the first time since arriving at the ranch, I realized the truth could no longer stay hidden. Morning came heavy and silent after the gunfight. Smoke still drifted from the barn where bullets had torn through the wooden walls, and the desert air carried the faint metallic smell of spent gunpowder. I stood on the porch watching the horizon while the rising sun painted the land gold, knowing the quiet would not last. Men like the ones who attacked during the night never rode alone for long. They would return, stronger, angrier, and certain of where to find me. Behind me, Caleb Boon stepped outside holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to me without speaking and leaned against the porch railing, his eyes scanning the distant hills. There was no fear in him, only calculation. "They weren't random riders," he finally said. "They came looking for you." I wrapped my hands around the warm tin cup but didn't drink. Lies had carried me this far, yet they felt useless now. He had seen how I handled a gun, how I moved under pressure. The woman he bought at auction no longer existed. My name isn't Anna, I said quietly. He nodded once, as if he already knew. Elena Cruz. The name hung between us like a confession. I told him everything then, about my father leading a resistance group near the border, about messages hidden inside clothing seams, about powerful men who feared information more than bullets. I explained how I had been captured during a betrayal, separated from allies who were likely dead or scattered. By the time I finished, the coffee in my hands had gone cold. There's a bounty, I added. $500. Dead or alive? Caleb let out a slow breath, staring toward the fields rather than at me. I waited for anger or regret, for him to realize the trouble he had brought upon himself by raising his hand at that auction. Instead, he gave a quiet half-smile. That explains a lot. You could still turn me in, I said. No one would blame you. He looked at me then, genuinely puzzled. I didn't buy you to sell you. Again. The simplicity of his answer left me speechless. Before either of us could say more, a faint cloud of dust appeared far off in the valley. Caleb noticed it at the same moment I did. The shape grew quickly, too large for travelers, too organized for ranchers. They're coming back, he said calmly. This time there were many riders, spreading wide as they approached, rifles glinting in the sun. My chest tightened. Staying meant danger for him, destruction for everything he had built. You should leave, I urged. This is my fight. He shook his head while loading ammunition into his rifle. My ranch. My rules. There was no arguing with that. We prepared quickly, moving with unspoken coordination. He positioned supplies near the door while I checked weapons and watched the ridgeline. The strange truth settled over me, we were no longer stranger and captive but partners facing the same storm. The riders arrived with thunder and shouting. Gunfire erupted, echoing across the open land. Dust exploded beneath hooves as bullets struck fences and walls. Caleb fired steadily from cover, every shot measured. I moved beside him, returning fire with equal precision, instincts guiding me without hesitation. Time blurred into noise and motion. One by one, the attackers retreated, surprised to find resistance stronger than expected. When the final riders fled, the desert fell quiet again, broken only by the wind brushing through broken fence posts. We stood in the yard surrounded by silence and survival. Later, as evening settled, I packed a small saddlebag. Staying would only bring more danger, and I refused to let his kindness become his downfall. Caleb watched from the gate as I prepared my horse. So you're leaving, he said. I have to, I replied. Trouble follows me. He handed me a pouch filled with supplies, food, ammunition, and water. A gesture prepared in advance, as if he had known this moment would come. You were never property here, he said quietly. I met his eyes, feeling something unfamiliar pull at my chest, not obligation, not fear, but belonging. Maybe I'll come back, I said. He tipped his hat, a faint smile breaking through his usual calm. Gate'll be open. As I rode into the fading Arizona light, the ranch growing smaller behind me, I realized the truth had changed everything. I had been sold like cattle, stripped of freedom and name. Yet somewhere between captivity and courage, I had found something unexpected, a man who saw me not as a prize or a threat, but as a person worth standing beside. And for the first time since my capture, the road ahead felt like a choice instead of an escape.